Hey everyone, it's Triple Mango Threat or Ashley, and today I'm going over a deck for a patron, and you too can see your own deck tech video when you sign up to become a Mangonificent patron. So jumping right into the deck tech, Drewby wanted a $50 to $60 budget and contemplated an Oblivion Ring tribal deck. But let's first talk about our commander, Daxos the Returned. For 1 white black, we have a 2/2 zombie soldier that says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you get an experience counter. And we can also pay 1 white black to create a white and black spirit enchantment creature token. It has this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of experience counters you have. So we definitely need to be casting enchantments for us to get these experience counters, and we just so happen to do that with Oblivion Ring Tribal. So it turns out there's a lot of similar cards to Oblivion Ring, which costs 2 and a white. It's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, we exile another target non-land permanent. When Oblivion Ring leaves the battlefield, we will return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Same could be said with Banishing Light. These are the same exact thing, just a different name. This specifically says it has to be under an opponent's control. And then there's Cast Out, and it has Flash for that 1 extra mana. When it enters the battlefield, we can exile a target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield, and it has Cycling, which can be helpful for 1 white. We can actually discard this card and just draw 1. Conclave Tribunal. So this has Convoke, which your creatures can help pay for the mana cost, and we will have a lot of creatures in this deck, so that's perfect. So we can end up paying 1 white or even no mana. When this enters the battlefield, we get to exile an opponent's card until this leaves the battlefield. Hieromancer's Cage enters the battlefield, will exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. Ixalan's Binding for 3 and a white is an enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, we exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. But your opponents can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card, so if we exile an opponent's Soul Ring, well, no other opponent can cast the Soul Ring until this leaves the battlefield. Prison Realm for 2 and a white, when it enters the battlefield, will exile a creature or a planeswalker an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield, and we get to scry 1 when it enters the battlefield. This does have a more specific type of what we can exile, but we're still getting that experience counter when we have our commander out, and casting enchantments trigger many other things that we'll mention in the video. The last one I want to talk about is Seal Away for 1 and a white. It has Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, we will exile target tapped creature an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. So before an opponent actually hits us with their attacking creature, or this can be one of their mana dorks, we can cast this at instant speed. So speaking of casting our enchantments and getting more benefits from it besides our commander, we can make a huge meta tokens with Ajani's Chosen. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to create a 2/2 white cat creature token. If that enchantment is an aura, you can attach that aura to your token. What's cool about this is that the tokens we make with our commander, they enter the battlefield. They do not have to be cast for Ajani's Chosen to get us more of these tokens, which is really cool. Archon of Sun's Grace for 2 and a white is a 3/4 Archon with flying and lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. And it has Constellation that says whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. So this is, in my opinion, better than Ajani's Chosen in this deck, because now we have 2/2 flyers, and Ajani's Chosen is still really good, but Archon of Sun's Grace, that is really good. Sigil of the Empty Throne. For 3 and 2 white, it's an enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you get a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. So the tokens we make with our commander will not trigger this because we're not casting them. And the last card in this category is Song of the World Soul for 4 white. It's an enchantment that says whenever you cast a spell, populate. This is a very powerful card. 6 mana can seem like a lot, but let's break it down. This is an enchantment that will trigger our commander as well as the other cards I mentioned in this category. By populating, we get to create a token that's a copy of a creature token we already control. So that could be the creatures we make from our commander. It could be the 4/4 Angel we're making, the 2/2 Pegasus. There's a lot of benefits from this card, so don't let the mana value of this intimidate you. Now I want to talk about ramp real quick. It's most likely we will 99% of the time cast Daxos on turn 3, because we're going to have mana rocks that can fix us by turn 2, and so by turn 3 we'll have enough to cast him and not worry about it. So we have Arcane Signet, Charcoal Diamond, and Marble Diamond. These are mana rocks that can tap for a color. But with Arcane Signet, it is much better than these other 2 options because it doesn't enter tapped, costs the same amount of mana, and we can choose white or black from this. Now Ebony Fly, Mind Stone, and Prismatic Lens. These are going to give us colorless mana, which can still help us cast our commander by turn 3, or just help us ramp throughout the game because white and black don't have a great way to ramp. So we have to substitute that with cards like these mana rocks that I'm mentioning. Let's talk about Knight of the White Orchid and Oreskos Explorer. These both cost 2 mana, but Knight of the White Orchid is a 2/2 human knight with first strike. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a plains card, put onto the battlefield, then shuffle. What's great is that it doesn't specify that it has to be a basic plains, so we can grab something like Snowfield Sinkhole, which does enter the battlefield tapped but will fix us by the next turn. Rescos Explorer, when it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for up to X plains cards, where X is the number of players who control more lands than you. We will reveal them and then put them into our hand. So we're not ramping technically from this, we're just getting those lands from our library to our hand. And last I want to talk about Starnheim Courser for 2 and a white. It's a 2/2 Pegasus with flying. It lets our artifacts and enchantment spells that we cast cost 1 less, and this is very helpful because it's repeatable. We can end up casting the Soul Ring we have in the deck for 0 mana, or those Oblivion Ring tribal cards 1 mana less, which is helpful as well. Now our commander is a big piece of this deck, so I want to talk about ways to protect Daxos, which is with Hyena Umbra, Kaios Ghost Form, and Minions Return. Hyena Umbra is going to give our commander totem armor, so if our commander would be destroyed, the enchantment is destroyed instead. Kaios Ghost Form is going to let us protect our commander that when it dies or is put into exile, we can return it to the battlefield, and that's very helpful. Last is Minions Return. It has Flash, which is a great way to sneak in a save for our commander, and whenever the enchanted creature dies, we get to return that card back to the battlefield under our control. Now, if we do happen to have some cards in our graveyard that we want to get back, we have Auramancer, Monk Idealist, and these two are the same thing, just returning those enchantments from our graveyard back to our hand. Crystal Chimes is a great one. We can pay 3 to cast it, pay 3 and tap it to sacrifice it, and then return all enchantment cards from our graveyard to our hand. And then there's Silent Sentinel for 5 white. It's a 4/6 Archon with flying. Whenever it attacks, we can return target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. This is a huge mana cost, but what's great about this is that whenever it attacks, so it doesn't even have to deal combat damage, we can get an enchantment back to our battlefield. So before damage is even dealt, we can grab things like Oblivion Ring or any of those cards, have it enter the battlefield, target one of our opponent's things that could be blocking, get that out of the way. There's a lot of neat things we can grab with this. So moving on to my favorite category is drawing cards. So we have things like Ambition's Cost and Ancient Craving. These are the exact same thing, same cost, just different name. We draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. And then there's Greed that had a reprint and it dropped the price significantly. So for 3 and a black, it's an enchantment that if we pay black and 2 life, we get to draw a card. Mesa Enchantress is a great card in this deck for 1 white. It's a 0/2 human druid. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. That is exactly what we want to be doing in this deck. Knight's Whisper for 1 and a black. You draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. Obnixilis Return for 3 black. It starts at 5 loyalty. The +1 is you draw a card, you lose 1 life. It does have an option to destroy a creature for its -3, and its -8 says target opponent gets an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, you lose 2 life. Read the Bones for 2 and a black. We scry 2, draw 2, lose 2. Secret Rendezvous for 1 white. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. Now you may be wondering why this is in the deck, and I put it here because this can actually be a very political card. You're giving somebody 3 cards to draw, so maybe you and another opponent that's behind can say, hey, as long as you don't attack me for the next X amount of turns, I'll let you draw 3. Or, hey, your commander's a little scary, as long as you don't swing at me for the next 3 turns, I'll let you draw 3. Don't be afraid to use cards like these in Commander, especially in casual EDH. I really think this is a fun one, especially for white. Sign in Blood for black. Target player draws 2, then loses 2 life. Soul Reaper of Mogus for 2 and a black. It's a 2/3 Minotaur Shaman, and it's an enchantment creature, so whenever we cast this, we're going to trigger a lot of things. For 2 and a black, we can sack a creature to draw a card. That's a lot of mana, and we have to sacrifice a creature to draw a card, but we can always sacrifice those tokens that we're making for free, so that can make up for the card draw. Succumb to Temptation for 1 black. It's an instant that says you draw 2 and lose 2. The last card in this category is Underworld Connections for 1 black. It's an enchantment aura that actually enchants a land, and we can tap that land to pay 1 life to draw a card. The last category I want to talk about is the Enchantment ETBs. So let's talk about Agent of Erebos. 3 and a black, we have a 2/2 zombie. Whenever this or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, we get to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Wow. Doomwake Giant, this is a really popular one. Whenever this or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. So that deck with all those 1/1 soldiers that you're playing against, you can say goodbye to them, and this is consistently as well. Grim Guardian, whenever this or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. Thoughrender Lamia, when this or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent discards a card. This can be very powerful, and the mana cost definitely explains that. The last one I want to talk about is Underworld Coinsmith. When it enters the battlefield or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. You can also pay a white and a black, pay 1 life, each opponent loses 1 life. Drewby, thank you so much for submitting this deck idea. I had a lot of fun building it, and it challenged me in a way, especially with the $50 to $60 budget. I found a lot of cards that were surprisingly like under $1, so it's nice to learn about cards I normally don't see, and it's also fun to make these decks. So again, thank you for being a patron, and you can also become a patron to help support this show, and you can become a Mangonificent tier patron to see your own deck tech video, as well as other rewards, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.